It's a great pleasure to be here for my first CyFy conference. Thank you to our Moroccan hosts for their wonderful hospitality, and thank you for the excellent arrangements, ORF. Well done. Digital technologies are rapidly transforming our lives. They are allowing for unprecedented advances in the human condition and giving rise to profound new challenges. Growing opportunities created by the application of digital technologies are paralleled by stark abuses and unintended consequences. And digital dividends coexist with digital divides. And as this change has accelerated, our ways of coping with it, the mechanisms for governance, for managing the impact, they have lagged behind. And Wendell spoke about this using a wonderful cartoon, these tiny little steps trying to catch up with those giant footmarks. Not that governments and other consequential actors around the world have not tried, but divergent approaches and ad hoc responses threaten to fragment the very interconnectedness that defines the digital age, leading to competing standards, different approaches, lessening trust, and discouraging cooperation across borders and across subject domains. This was the reason why the Secretary General convened this high-level panel in July 2018. He asked us to consider the issue of digital cooperation, by which we mean how we work together to address these diverse impacts of digital technologies. In particular, he asked us to consider how digital cooperation could contribute to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, the ambitious agenda that the international community adopted to protect people and the planet, and an agenda that was endorsed by 193 UN member states in 2015. And he asked us to consider models of digital cooperation to advance the debate surrounding governance in the digital age. It's a shot of the panel at our first meeting in New York. Now, we set about our tasks by spreading out to engage with stakeholders on the ground. We went to tech hubs in India, China, Israel, Kenya, Silicon Valley, Europe. We had more than 2,000 bilateral engagements, participated in 1,000 plus events, and did whatever was possible within the limitations of time and resources to listen to as many diverse voices as possible from as many aspects of digital technologies as possible. From startups to the big tech giants, we tried to cover the entire digital space. This is some data on our consultations regionally across different stakeholders. And this is what we have broadly come to realize through our consultations, through our debates. Effective digital cooperation today requires that multilateralism, despite the current strains, be strengthened. It also requires that multilateralism be complemented by multi-stakeholder approaches, or multi-stakeholderism, if you will. Cooperation that involves not only governments, but a far more diverse set of actors: civil society, academia, technologists, and the private sectors. And this, at the risk of repeating, we need to bring much more diverse voices to the table than before, a point that has been made in the speeches this morning. So the next billions from Africa, India, and China have to be part of the discussion. So have to be women, youth, indigenous people, rural populations, and the elderly. Now, in our report, which will be released on Monday, we'll be making 5 sets of recommendations. And these are interlocking recommendations. So for a government minister, such as the distinguished minister who addressed us this morning, it is often connecting different pieces of policy together, using digital technologies as a horizontal driver, whether it is in the health space or in the national security space. That's what matters really to policymakers. So we hope that our report and its recommendations allow policymakers, particularly in developing countries, to appreciate the interconnectedness of the different pieces. Because we often see that when you are in capitals, you have one ministry looking at internet access, another department looking at the abuse of social media or regulating the competition space, whereas the nature of these technologies is such that you have to work across those domains. The very first recommendation is around building an inclusive digital economy and society. And we are emphasizing that the role of digital technologies in the SDGs achievement goes far beyond simply promoting greater access to the internet. Yes, access is important, but it's not enough. With the right blend of policies, investments in infrastructure, and human capacity, and cooperation across what in India we heard was Samaj, Sarkar, and Bazaar, which means society, government, and businesses. So when you bring those 3 actors together and you deploy the combinatorial effects of, let's say, digital IDs, financial inclusion, low entry barrier e-commerce, you unleash growth in ways that just providing access doesn't do. So this is part of our first set of recommendations in terms of building a more inclusive digital economy. We have called for what we term as platforms for digital public goods. You see these in India. The India Stack is the perfect example. You see aspects of this in China. You see aspects of this in Kenya, M-Pesa, for example. And then in addition to these common rails, we've called for guardrails. So regulatory mechanisms that are agile, that take a systems approach, and that, as the experience of China, for example, shows, can be accordioned to accommodate the changing demands in terms of the regulatory requirements. The debate that's going on in Europe and America today, in particular around the market power of the giants, we have suggested that the current approaches are probably inadequate, and a new combined systems approach where competition policy commissioners sit down with consumer protection authorities and others to craft regulatory approaches in an agile way, that is needed. And this realization, even in capitals such as Brussels, it is quite clear that this realization is happening. The GDPR is a good thing, but its effects on the competition space are now being realized, and so there is the next steps in the GDPR approach, which we see in Europe, in India, and in the UK. This conference has as one of its themes society. So after looking at the inclusive digital economy, we look at what are the impacts of digital technologies on individuals and society in terms of human rights, in terms of human agency. We've discussed at the conference today the impact of artificial intelligence. So what does it mean in terms of our agency? And how should we be approaching the regulation of these technologies? We've also looked at trust, societal cohesion, trust across borders, trust within societies, where digital technologies can sometimes help, but other times can hinder. And we've come up with certain suggestions with regard to all of these and with regard to the enhancing of digital stability and security, going beyond the traditional approaches to cybersecurity, which in many ways the last few years have shown is inadequate when it comes to protecting ideas, institutions. So trust and security online, and then how do we make sure that these priority action areas get advanced in a sophisticated way at the national level, at the regional level, and at the global level? So we are suggesting a systems approach, a multilateral systems approach to regulation and to governance. And after looking at the current governance architecture, the 1,000+ institutions that exist today to regulate different parts of the digital universe, we are suggesting 3 models of improving global digital cooperation. So there is no silver bullet. There's no one solution that fits all the challenges, but there are some building blocks that we are suggesting to the Secretary General and requesting him to initiate a broad, inclusive process. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to recall the world we all want process that led to the SDGs. So we want something similar. So the panel is just 22 individuals, although it is perhaps the most diverse panel in the UN's history. People from very different backgrounds from all parts of the world, but still we can't claim to speak for everyone on this planet. So we would like the ideas in the report, the model governance architectures, to be the catalyst for a more inclusive process of consultations that leads. It should not be just consultation for the sake of consultation, but that these consultations should lead by next year, which is the 75th anniversary of the UN, to commitment to digital cooperation that enshrines shared values, that enshrines common principles, and the functions that the international community believes should be performed at the global level by digital governance architectures. Let me conclude by quoting a couple of passages from the report, and these passages are from what we call a declaration of digital interdependence. This is really the theme that resonated the most throughout the process. Despite some of us being really nerds in the digital space, we were struck by how digitally interconnected the world is today. So we have titled our report, The Age of Digital Interdependence, and I hope that also resonates with you when you read the report. So let me read to you a short extract from what we call the Declaration of Digital Interdependence. Humanity is still in the foothills of the digital age. The peaks are yet uncharted, and the promise still untold. But the risks of losing our foothold are apparent. Dangerous adventurism among states, exploitative behavior by companies, regulation that stifles innovation and trade, and an unforgivable failure to realize the vast potential for advancing human development. We believe that our aspirations and vulnerabilities are deeply interconnected and interdependent, that no one individual, institution, corporation, or government alone can or should manage digital developments, and that it is essential that we work through our differences in order to shape our common digital future. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to answer a question if Chitra.
you mentioned GDPR, and that you said that it was sort of, just to clarify, GDPR is, according to the UN, perhaps not the way forward, so we park that. And then how will this report now deal with, let's say, the WTO, which is much more biting and much more volatile at this point? And this is just an open question for which I hope you'll have some answers, because if the GDPR itself, which is it is one step, so please.
Yeah, so we're not taking a position on the GDPR as you described it. We're actually describing the ways in which data can be protected better and privacy can be protected better, and there we are noting the EU GDPR as a good positive development. But we are already seeing with the experience of implementing the GDPR that there would be need to go beyond it. So in a sense, the GDPR plus approach, which is being experimented in UK, the idea of trust data fiduciaries, which mediate trust between the consumers, if you will, they are also producers in some way, and the companies. And likewise in India, I think in the morning it was mentioned that the data empowerment and protection architecture seeks to go beyond this idea of, the person who's interested in your data is also the one who's asking you for your consent. So separating the two functions and enhancing the protections that are available. Now, the e-commerce W2E issue. So in our chapter on the inclusive digital economy, we go into some of these regional and global policy mechanisms. So there is the issue of taxation of digital companies, and that's an issue in Africa, for example. So a fairer distribution of the authority to tax, and a multilateral discussion is advancing on that under the edges of the OECD, but involving more than just the OECD countries. Likewise, e-commerce rules, where the challenge is much more complex, and some other areas, the data protection commissioners have their own network. So we note these ongoing efforts, and then we suggest what should be done to go beyond those efforts. And I think that is the key challenge, and that's not just the UN's job. So the UN will not be responsible for perhaps most of the ideas in the report. They are addressed to national governments, to civil society, to the private sector. So in some ways, the report and its recommendations are open source. So it's up to everyone. And I think that was the point I was trying to underline by reading you some extracts from this Declaration of Digital Interdependence, that it's really a collective responsibility that will have to be discharged. Yes, please.
Thank you for that, and I commend you on the effort. Really look forward to reading the report. I was just wondering whether
Oh yes, just for the translation.
Thank you for that, and I look forward to reading the report when it's out. I was just wondering whether, as part of the panel, you also looked at the question around the sustainability of the digital economy, especially when you're talking about interdependency and digital interdependency. So whether it's about supply chains or whether it's about the impact on the environment, and if not, then where do we accommodate that conversation?
I'm glad that you asked that question. So we did look at that. There's one member of the panel in particular who was quite passionate about this. And in the section on data for development, so in chapter 2 of our report, we make some recommendations around deploying data and AI for solving these global problems. And one of them is the environmental protection sustainability issue. And what we are saying is that the same efficiency that has led to this extreme productivity in the digital supply chains, if that can be applied, those methods can be applied to reducing waste, to reusing material, what is now being called the circular economy, so going beyond the green economy. So that would deliver dramatic results for the SDGs related to the environmental protection issue. We are also suggesting such approaches to agriculture and to health. And frankly, this is not just about solving developmental problems, it's also about the governance issue. In one of the three models that we are suggesting, we underline this point that it's only by iterative practice, by actually doing things, solving problems, that the right governance insights would come. It won't be a committee of wise men and women sitting somewhere deciding that this is what works best for governance. It'll be wide consultations, inclusive discussions, and also practice. And this is one of those areas. Okay, thank you very much. So stand by, read the report. Till then, actually, it's under embargo. So if you want to write about this, please wait till Monday. Thank you.